All right, so for state, again, if you understand state extremely well and events extremely well, you've got like 3/4 of React, and you won't have any trouble with the rest of it. There are a few other concepts that are tricky and challenging, but if you don't get state down to where you really, really understand it well and know exactly what happens, you'll struggle like crazy with React. So I'm going to go over this one. I'm going to do the quiz questions. We'll talk about them. I'll do the code. And then once I'm done with the code, I'm going to put the code up on the screen and we're going to step through it, single step through the code and watch what happens. And I'll even use the whiteboard over here to record some stuff. Because understanding state and how the whole state management happens is absolutely critical. Okay, so if you don't get it during the time that we're here, you'll have time to get it yourself, but then you should also spend time in the evenings. One thing that was really helpful I found is you just go ask ChatGPT. You give it a prompt, something like, "You were my tutor, test my knowledge of React state." Okay, and just let it ask questions. And if you do it as, tell it to do it as multiple choice questions, and you give it the wrong answer, then it will usually tell you why it's wrong. I have found that if I type in my answer, it sometimes can figure out if I got it right or not, but not usually. Okay. All right. So anyway, just do whatever it takes to make sure you get state down. So let's do the quiz. Since there are so few of you now, with Rakaya joining us, I'm probably going to get our victimizer and do it, randomize the questions just to add a little fun to the quizzes. But I haven't got that done yet, and so I'm just going to round robin at this point. And I'll let Caroline go first. What are hooks?
So hooks are functions that start to use and allow components to, I don't know how to explain. Sorry.
Okay, anybody want to help on that? I mean, that was right. There are functions provided by React that you use. What do they provide? What information? Why do they exist?
Can I go?
Well, yes, please. Just speak up. I don't want to call on people. I just want you to speak up.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, the functions that allow the state basically they allow the component to access the value of the state and something to do with re-render.
That's good. That is true for the use state hook. In general, there are many, many hooks. React provides about a dozen hooks. And all of the hooks, they provide capabilities. This is how React gives you functionality. So they provide a whole bunch of functionality, and the hooks give you access to that functionality, to React's core functionality. So if you want, if React says, oh, you need to have a way to let you manipulate the behavior of X, Y, or Z, they'll usually do it by introducing a hook. Okay, so those are hooks. And Noah, what are the rules of hooks? 3 rules of hooks.
Yeah, there has to be at the top level of the component.
Yes, they have to be called at the top level of the component, which means the top level of the component is what?
We need to structure the use state.
No. What does it mean when I say when you say they have to be at the top level of the component? What does that mean?
So they have to be called first at the beginning of the function of the component?
Yes, a component is a function. And so the very first statements that the function executes must be the hooks.
To execute it first.
Okay. And that also, we say at the top level, but that's just a shorthand way for the rule really is that they all must be called every single time the component renders. In other words, every single time the component function is called, the hooks must, every single one of them must execute and in the same order every single time. And so the way to accomplish that is to put all the hooks at the top level and just put them all the very first statements. Usually your very first statements in a component function is all the hooks. You might have a 0, 1, 2. It's not uncommon to have 5 or 6 hook calls in a function. So they just all happen right at the top. And so they execute in the same time. Okay. The reason they have to execute in the same order every time is because React doesn't really know what your code's like. All they know is, oh, it's a component running and this is the 3rd hook call. So it keeps track of that. And that's how it maintains, the correlation between your code and their caches. So, I mean, that's kind of a technical detail you don't need to worry about. But they just need to worry about, they must all be called at the same time in the same order. You can't put them in if statements or anything like that. So you just put them all right at the top of your component function. Okay, so that's rule number 1. They must be called at the top level. Rule number 2.
Number 2, and the naming has to include use.
Okay, the naming has to, it's not just include use, it must start with use. U-S-E, all lowercase, and then it must be followed by an uppercase letter. So if you say user, all lowercase, that's not a hook. Use followed by an uppercase letter. Okay, that's rule 2. It's the naming. They must be named. Their name must start with use. Okay, and then followed by an uppercase letter. All right, the 3rd rule.
The 3rd rule is actually you mentioned it. You combined it together with the first one.
Nope, different one. There's a different one.
It's about the locality.
It's about who can use them.
Only code.
It's used by other hooks. Remember that one?
Yes, can be called by components or other hooks. That's all. If you try to call a hook outside of a component, it will throw an exception. Okay, you will fail. So it can only be called from within a component or from within another hook. So you can actually create your own hooks. So you're allowed to create your own hooks. We'll do that a little later when we get to the back end. We'll create a hook or 2. And so you can create your own hooks. But so your hooks are allowed to call other hooks. But components are where you usually call your hooks. Okay, so but if you just have a function sitting out there, a top level function in a file, and you try to call a hook, crash. Okay. All right. Rukaya, what's the purpose of state?
So state makes a component dynamic in the sense, so if there's like a user interaction or there's like a user input, then the state gets updated, which updates the DOM.
Yes. So state is intended to hold data that is going to live across renderings of the component. So it lives as long as the component is mounted in the DOM. And it good, that disappeared. It lives as long as the component's mounted in the DOM, and it is something that has to have to be available for longer than just a single rendering. So a component is just a function. When the function is called, the component simply calls, or sorry, when the function, all right, when React wants to render your component on, put it into the DOM or update it in the DOM, it calls your function. And all of the local variables in your function, every time a function exits, all your local variables get thrown away. When the function gets called again, all your local variables get reinitialized to their default values. So there is nothing, local variables won't allow you to keep track of information that has to live. Oh, dang it.
You're on the wrong question.
I answered the next question. I do that a lot. Let's see, where were we? Okay, Caroline, I gave you a gift. why can't you just put it in a local variable?
Because the use state, the local variables, you lose track of the value that they have between each re-render. And that's why we use use state to keep track of those values in between the renders in those components.
Okay, good. That's exactly right. You described that better than I was doing. Okay, so the local variables don't work. You need state. I want to emphasize though on this state. State is data that affects the way that the component looks or behaves.
Oh.
If it doesn't modify the way that the component looks or behaves, it's not state. Use a local variable instead. So for example, if you want it to always be red, don't put the color red in state. Instead, put red in a local variable or a parameter. If the user action makes it switch between red and green, or a timer or something else make it switch between red or green, then that's state, because it changes color each time it's rendered. When its color can change when it gets rendered. Okay, so state affects the look or the behavior of the component. Okay, where were we? See, this is why I need the victimizer to give me my random people, because I can't remember where we are. All right, Noah, what two actions happen when you call the state setter? Remember, the state setter is, what is the state setter?
A function.
It's a function.
Function, which is, how do you get it?
By the use state.
Yes, use state returns it.
Use state.
Use state returns an array of two elements. What's in the first?
Index.
In the first element in the array
The state
is the state value. And what's in the second one?
is the state updater.
Yeah, we call it a state setter function. So I'll use that term always, a state setter. I'll either just call it a state setter, or if I'm feeling verbose, I'll say the state setter function. It's really state setter function is probably more correct, but I'll just say state setter. So you call the state setter function. And when I call the state setter function, which I got back from the use state, what are the two things that happen?
First thing, we initialize the state with the first state, which is 0.
That's what happens when you call use state. That's not what happens when you call the state setter function.
Okay, so when it changed the behavior of the state, or it changed the state to the new state.
You're changing it to this new state, but that means that what does the state setter function do?
We
It-
update.
It tells the
Updates.
use state what to update, the first variable.
Okay, React keeps a cache. You know what a cache is?
Yes, like that.
Just a bunch of data that it holds on to. React maintains the data for your component in global memory. We call it a cache. Okay, so I'll use that word cache a lot. A cache is just data that's being held onto for later use. So React holds a cache that contains the value of your state. It contains the current value of your state. When you call the state setter function, it updates the cache. Okay, what's the second thing it does?
Which question is the fourth one?
What two actions happen when you call a state setter function? Okay, so it updates the state cache.
Update the state cache and return to the use state.
Nope, what's the second one? Anyone?
Tells the use state what it's going to be happening to the first.
Nope, any other guess? Rakaya, you want to try?
It re-renders the component.
Okay, it doesn't re-render it immediately. I'll say this, it triggers a re-render. And I'll ask you guys this question over and over again throughout the course of studying React. A lot of times I'll say, oh, you call the state setter. What are the two things that happen? Because you've got to get this in your head and you've got to understand it. Number one, it updates the cache. And number two, it triggers a re-render. Okay. I'll go over that on this little whiteboard in a minute when we get to the code. Okay. Is that clear? Got it?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I want to understand the difference between what, like when you say triggers a re-render and like when a re-render happens, as in like
I'll go over that. Do you
Okay.
guys remember? But I'll go over it again when I'm doing the stuff on the board. Do you guys remember the event loop from the junior side?
Thank you.
The event queue?
Yes.
The event queue.
The event queue, it's something that JavaScript does in order to manage what it has to work on.
Oh, yeah.
It keeps a list of all of the events that have to be executed.
Oh.
Wait, right?
Okay,
That's similar to-
so
Okay.
React will, or JavaScript will execute the current function. When it's done executing functions, then it goes and looks in the event queue to see if there's anything in there that it needs to do.
That's promise.
Okay, yeah, promises work this way. Okay, and so when we say use state triggers a re-render, what it does is it puts a re-render in the event queue. And so then when JavaScript is done executing all of the function code and it's done with its executions, it goes, checks the event queue, it finds a re-render in there, and then that causes it to call your function again.
Okay, got it.
Okay? And I'll go over that many, many times. We're gonna go walk through these like 6 times. Yes.
Just in terms of our, in terms of what we call it, the exercise we have here. So the 2 things you mentioned is the 2. What was the question? The 2 action happen when we call state setter. Update the state.
Update the state cache. Update the cache and trigger a re-render. Just get those, memorize those. Update the cache, trigger a re-render. Okay. All right. Now, Rakaya, when does the local state variable get updated? The local state variable means the one that you declared in your use state call.
When the component is re-rendered?
Correct. It does not get updated after when you call the state setter. When you call the state setter, it's natural to think, oh, I called the state setter, therefore the state value changed.
Yeah.
It did not. It's still the old value. It does not update to the new value until the re-render happens. And the reason for that is because React doesn't know what that variable is, doesn't know how to update it. So it can't. It's not possible in the way the JavaScript language works. So on the re-render is when the state variable gets updated. Yeah.
When you mention re-render, is it when we refresh the page?
No, it's when the re-render event runs. Anytime React calls you, you have no control over when React will call your component function. You have no control over it. But when it does decide to call you, that's when you'll get the new value out of the use state call. Okay, so another way to say that is the local state variable gets updated the next time you call use state. It's another way to say it. Okay. Any questions about these quiz questions? Okay, now I'm gonna walk you through the solution. And since you guys have all done this exercise, I assume you did it, Rakaya. I got the event one from you, but not state.
I've completed that.
You did that one, good. Then you know how to do this. So you're gonna tell me what to do. I've got it here. React state. Yep, there it is. Let me run it. npm run dev and open. So here it is right here, the React image bank. This is the starter file. This is the starter. This is what you started with. Now the exercise says to make source, caption, and description all be arrays. Okay, so let's do that. I probably, to save time, should have done this for you. I noticed that the exercise that was in GitHub did not have the extra images in it, and so I added those. And if you downloaded the exercise late enough, you got the images in it. If you didn't get the images. Sorry about that. So you just had to guess. So cool car.jpg and cool kitty.jpg. Okay. And then we want to make these sources. This is a little, I'm kind of anal about a few things. Okay, so I get annoyed when I see code that violates some common sense rules. If it's one single thing, the name should be a singular. If it's an array, it should be plural. Okay, so let's please follow that. Don't use a plural verb for one single thing, or a plural noun, plural name for one single thing. Don't use a singular name for something that has multiple instances in it. Okay, so I want you to change it to sources. So I'm just going to do that here right now. And caption, yikes.
Use caption list.
Okay, and then let's see, a cool car. Oh, I got the kitty spelled wrong. Okay. And a kitty that is cool. I did that because I found that when I do this in the future, you switch between cool car and cool cat. You can't tell the difference. So I made them different. Okay, description. I don't like this long description here. So I'm just going to do sky, car, kitty, just to save space. Okay. And then this has to be plural. 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 Now I'm getting some errors here. Where anybody want to tell me what this error is? My source? What's the one? If I hover over this red underlined source right here, what's the error going to tell me?
It's expecting a string and not an array.
Yes, expecting a string of an array of strings.
Yep. Source is expecting to get a string, but instead you're trying to give it a string array. We need to fix that. Usually when I do my code, I wouldn't start here and make the changes here. I actually was planning on doing that and I forgot. I usually go to the component and fix the component first, and then go find all the places the component is used and fix those up. I find that the best way to work, but unfortunately I did it backwards this time. All right, so let's go to image. Do image first. Where's image? Right here. Okay, so instead of taking a single string, it's going to take a string array. And since it's plural, multiple items there, I want a plural name. So I'm going to change it to that, which means I have to fix it here. And then I'm going to just say, I have to display something. I can't pass an array into this. So you see, it tells me that a string array is not assignable to string. So in the image tag, it needs to take a single string, but I'm passing it an array. So that's a problem. So I have to fix that. So, for now, I'm just going to give the first one. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, this is what actually confused me. In app.tsx and the image.tsx, so it has to be, because the naming has to be the same as the one.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, I changed the name, which means I have to go over to where I'm calling it in app and change the name to match. So this now has to be sources like this. Okay.
So the sources is
it has to match in both cases. The blue underline is because it's not a word that it recognizes. It's just my spell checker.
okay, so the line 20 image sources equals sources.
That's success. That compiles now.
In
This name here has to match the name that's in the component.
And in which place, if you go to the image.tsx, do you want to see it?
Right here, right here, and right here.
It has to be in all.
Has to match.
Yeah, I know.
Has to match.
Okay.
But then it
This
doesn't
is
match.
where I've declared my prop. This was the previous exercise. I'm declaring my prop. I have a prop named sources. I'm destructuring the props object here. And I get sources. So when I use this component, I must pass a prop named sources. Okay. Yeah.
I think I see now, because here in this component, we are returning a basic HTML kind of.
JSX.
The app function, it's okay that we modify the SRCs to be plural. Image SRCs equals SRCs as plural. But it's not necessary to change it in the HTML component,
HTML doesn't care about this. This never goes into the HTML.
That's why.
This is a prop. I define it, I declare it, I give it a name. It never shows up in the HTML. It does not get pushed into the DOM. What gets pushed into the DOM is the JSX that is returned by the image component. Okay. All right. That clear? Let's do the same for caption now. Caption, I need to change this to an array. And now you'll see here this error went away because it's now an array, expects an array. I'm going to change it to S so that it's plural. And now I have a problem. Well, now it's going to display, it's going to take this array and turn it into a string, which is going to be all the captions with commas between them. I don't want that. I want just a specific one. So for now, let me put the 0 element one. Okay.
The thing is, I'm trying to match the function call.
So here it is. Here's the prop. The prop is now, you see, I'm calling it caption. I'm passing caption. That's not what it wants anymore. It wants captions plural. It's not assignable to caption does not exist. It says caption does not exist. Did you mean captions with an S? So it gave me a nice little hint and help as to how to fix the problem. So yes, I did mean captions with an S because now I changed the caption to take captions with an S as the prop name.
So this is the function call not the JSX. Line 4 is
on line 2 and on line 4. That's where I'm declaring what the name of the prop is. Okay, let's go do now description. I want it to take a string array and I want to change its name to be plural. Plural. And then here I'm just going to do this, the one at 0. Okay. So again, I do these a small step at a time. Always do your code small step at a time. Now, how do I fix this problem here? I still have I have an error here on on the description prop. It says text does not exist on that type. Did I mean text plural? Yes, I did. Okay. Don't worry about how ugly that intrinsic attributes and props things is. Unfortunately, these messages can be hard to read. Okay, the button, there's no change to be made to the button. So now we're okay. So now if I switch over, it looks the same. Beautiful image of space, sky, click for next image, react image bank, and that image. Okay, now I can go over here and I can go to my image. And instead of doing image of 0, I can do image of 1. What do we expect to see now when I flip over? The second image. Good. Okay, the car. All right, good. Okay, so now I've got it compiling again. I've got the props set up like they're supposed to be. So now let's go and talk about state. So now I'm going to add the state. So I'm going to add the state. How do I add state? By calling. What function do I have to call? useState, and it's going to return an array. So I'm going to destructure the array. And what's the first one going to be? The state variable, which I'll name index. You can name it anything you want. And then the setter function, it will make your code easier to understand. And I have to import useState. The easiest way to import something that's not there is to click inside of the error message, go find the light bulb. Sometimes it'll be blue, sometimes yellow. Click it, and it will say add the import from React. Okay, boom, there it's in. All right, so it added it. All right, and now instead of sources of 0, I'm going to do sources of index. Now, what am I supposed to pass the useState function?
Is it the number you're starting on, or we want the index value to be?
It's the beginning, the starting value of index. Okay. So I want it to start at, let's say 0. Okay. Good. Okay. Now I'm not calling set index. You can name this function anything you want. I see a lot of different names for it, but your code will be simpler and easier to understand if you name it set followed by the name of the state variable with uppercase. And just so always follow that convention. If you name it index, set index. If you name it count, set count. If you name it color, set color. Okay? Always use that. Always use that. It's not required, but it's a convention that will make your code easier to understand. Okay. All right. Yes.
So when the use state is similar to for loop, like the index is similar to I and set index similar to I plus one.
No, not at all. Index can be, I could have called it current. I just chose index just for fun. But I'm going to use it to index into this array. That's why I call it index. Okay. All right. And the set index, I'm going to call set index and pass it whatever number I want it to be next. All right. So I need to put a on click here to handle it. On clicks will be done in the next exercise, so I'm not going to go into what it really does. But what I want to have happen, I'm going to pass an arrow function that says increment the index by 1. So when you're clicked on it, I'm going to increment the index by 1. Okay, so this part's important. So I'm calling the state setter right here. When this image gets clicked, I'm going to call this arrow function, which is going to set the index to 1 bigger than it is right now. Okay.
You can use down click on the parent or on children.
Anywhere you want. Put it on any of those you want. I chose to put it on the outer div. You can put it on the image. You can put it on the inner div, whatever you'd like. Okay, so here we go. If I click it, then it should go. So it did. Now, why'd I get this?
Out of scope, because we reach out of the
So that the variable went above the number of images. So we'll fix that at a later time. Right now, I'm just going to leave it like this. So now if I click, index is now 0 because I refreshed the page. I click, index goes to 1. I click, index goes to 2. I click, index goes to 3.
Well, let's refresh the page.
Then it reloads the whole component. It sets the state back to the initial, to your whatever you pass into the use state. When you refresh the page, all the state gets wiped out. And then it re-renders again, so you get your initial rendering value. Okay, so let's quickly go in and fix the other ones, and then I'll walk through this over and over again. Let's see, I've got caption, do the same thing here. Const index, set index equals use state and 0, and then this is going to be index. And I'm going to put my on click here. Set index to index plus 1. Okay, let's go make sure that worked. This is the caption. If I click the caption, there it went to cool car and a kitty. Okay, and then if I click again, it will go to whoops. It's out of range now. Okay, all right. Any questions on this? I'm going kind of quick now. Const index set index equals use state 0. And this is going to be index. And then when I click on the P, on click equals arrow function set index to index plus 1. All right. Oh, I forgot to import use state. So let me get it here. There we go. Now I go back to the description. And if I click, it goes to car, to cat, kitty, and then nothing. If I refresh, everything resets. That one still goes. This one still goes. This one still goes. Okay. So it's working. That's what you should have done. Now, what I need to do is discuss why it works. Okay, so now you see that it works. I wanted to go over why it works. To do this, I'm going to spend all my time in front of this screen, and we're going to go over and over and over and over again until you guys tell me exactly what's happening. So if I pull this over to here, Rakaya, is that visible?
No.
Was that a yes or a no? More?
No. More. Yeah.
Better, yeah.
Yeah, but now it's got that on it. Let's see. What if I put it on the other side?
Probably better, yeah. No, then you'll have the faces there. Oh, there you go.
Is that visible?
That works, yeah. Yeah.
That works?
Mhm.
Okay. I think this will be okay. I don't think it'll obscure the code. All right. We're going to pretend we're React. I'm going to switch to the image. It's going to be more interesting to do. Yeah, actually, they're all the same. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to do image. Okay. All right. Here we go. We're going to walk through this code. So React decides to render our image. Okay. For the very first time. The very first time it renders, we call that mounting. Okay. So the component's going to get mounted the very first time. And mounting in React speak is just placing your component into the DOM so it becomes visible. So when the component when its JSX gets put into the DOM, that means your component is mounted. Okay, so we're going to do it for the very first time. I'm going to keep track of the cache values, and I'm going to keep track of the event queue. That dark enough to see on the video?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, here we go. React decides it wants to mount my image into the DOM. So it calls the component. It calls the component function. Passes it the props, which we destructure to get our sources. So now we have our sources array, string array. Then what's the very next line of code that executes? Line 8. Okay. I'm going to do this over and over and over. You're going to tell me, you're going to answer my questions. And until I get the sense that all of you are able to answer the questions correctly, I'm going to do it again. So we'll do it again and again and again and again until you are giving me the right answers. And they're just coming off the top of your head and you don't have to think about them. All right. So if it gets boring, it's your fault. Okay. All right, here we go. Line 8 executes. When we execute line 8, what's the first thing that happens?
It calls useState.
It calls useState because it always executes the right-hand side of an equal sign first. Okay, so it executes the right-hand side. We call useState. What do we pass it?
We pass it.
The initial value.
We pass it 0, which is the initial value we want it to have. Okay, good. So what does React do? What React does is React says, oh, this is the first time this image has been called. It's being mounted into the DOM. So I am going to allocate a cache location for that first one. I'm going to put index up here. React actually has no clue that I've called it index. It doesn't know. All it knows is that it got called. So and then I say, okay, this is the very first time I allocate it and I give it a value of whatever I passed to the useState call, which is 0. Good. Okay. What's the next? So that's where we are right now. Right here, we just finished executing useState. What's the next thing that happens?
An array is returned.
Yep, it returns an array, and we, what's the word? What do we do to the array?
Destructure it.
We destructure the array, and the first element in the array gets assigned to
The value that we passed to useState.
Yeah, sorry. The first element, sorry, let me be a little more precise on here. We're destructuring. So useState returns an array, we destructure it. We declare a variable named index, and we assign it the value that was the first element returned by useState, which is going to be the value from cache, which is 0. Okay. Then we declare a variable named set index, and we assign it the second element in the array returned by useState, which is going to be the state setter function. Okay, so this is a function that will modify the cache for that state.
Oh,
Okay, so it returns the state setter function. So I now have index, variable index has the value.
of 1.
It's not 1.
Not yet? Okay, 0.
It's
Zero.
whatever's in cache. It has the value 0. And set index has the value of whatever the function is.
Whatever the function is?
Whatever the state setter function
Oh,
returned.
okay.
Sorry. Yeah, but it's the state setter function that was returned. Yeah.
So on line 8 is pretty much restructuring. When we say index is equal to use state, for example, first element,
Yes.
and set index equal
yep.
use state the
Second element. Exactly. Okay. So now we evaluate this JSX. So let's evaluate the JSX. First of all, we have to find all of the curly braces that have expressions in them and convert them into
Arrow.
things to pass into the DOM. So I find this one, I see an arrow function. So I take that arrow function and I pass that arrow function to onClick. So now what onClick does, or what React does with this onClick, is it turns it into a register event handler. Okay, so it's going to register the event handler on the div for us and pass it this function, this arrow function. Okay, then then here's my next curly braces. So now I'm going to go evaluate sources at what's index?
0.
Sources at 0. And so sources of 0 is going to be
The first
first-
image.
the string that contains the first image. Good. All right. So I've done that. And now I can take this whole JSX and return it to React. React takes that JSX and pushes it into the DOM. You know, converts it to all of the create element calls and so on, and then pushes it into the DOM for us. Okay. So at that point now, the DOM, the browser, displays that image. So that image now appears on the screen with this function registered as the the click event handler, and with the source pointing to the first image. So we see the first image on the page. Okay, got it? Okay. Now some annoying user comes along and clicks on the image. What happens? It calls, the DOM calls this onClick handler, the event handler, which is this arrow function. So now we're going to call this arrow function. So how do we call the arrow function? What's the first thing that executes when we call the arrow function?
Set index.
We call set index, and we pass it what?
0 plus 1.
Yeah, index plus 1, index is 0, we add 1, we get 1. So now we're going to call set index with the value of 1. Okay, so what are the two things that happen when you call a state setter? I called the state setter. What are the two things that
Updates
happen?
the state cache in React.
Updates the cache. So it was 0. It's going to update it with whatever I passed it, which is now 1.
And it
And
triggers a re-render.
triggers a re-render, which means that it puts this render event into the event queue. Okay. Then it says, okay, I'm done executing this handler function. So the JavaScript says, oh, I'm done executing all the functions. What do I do when I'm done executing functions?
Look at the event queue.
I check the event queue. So when I'm done executing the function, I go to the event queue. What's in the event queue? Render. How do I render?
We have to call the
You call the function. Yes, to render, you call the function. So we're going to call the image function again. Okay, so we're going to call the image function. The first line of code that executes is line 8. Then what does it do?
calls use state
Calls use state.
with the value
Passes it
1.
No, it does not pass it 1. You see, there's a 0 there. It passes a 0.
Stays at zero.
This is hard coded in there. It always passes at 0. So it's going to pass use state the value 0. So React now says, oh, use state got called. Let me look and see if this component, if this is the first time this component is being rendered. And the answer is no, it's not the first time. Since it's not the first time, it ignores what you pass in as the parameter, and it instead returns the value from cache. So it now returns an array that has 2 elements in it. It returns an array that looks like 1, comma, setter, the setter function. Okay. So that's the other array that gets returned. We destructure it. We create the variable index and we give it the value
Of 1.
1. And the set index gets set the value of
Setter function.
that state setter. Okay. Got it? So now index is 1. Set index is the same state setter function it was before. Index is 1. Now we're going to go here. We're going to evaluate this. We're going to create a new arrow function here that we're going to pass in as the click handler, and React will add that as a event handler, and we're going to set the source equal to sources at
Index
1, which will be the string giving us the second image, right? Which in our case is the car. And then we get all this JSX. The JSX mounts the JSX gets pushed into the DOM. So the component updates with the new image and the new setter function. And then React says, okay, I'm done. The function finishes. So we finished doing the render, so we can cross it off the event queue. That got knocked off. That got executed. Now we're done executing. What do we do when we're done executing a function?
We check the event queue.
We check the event queue. Is there anything in there?
No.
No. So the JavaScript then just says, okay, nothing to do. I'm just going to sit here and loop and loop and loop and wait and see if the user does anything interesting. Okay.
I thought you gotta move to the index too, right?
Not yet.
Nothing.
I can't do anything
It
now.
rendered the second image.
I'm done executing. I'm done executing the event queue. I'm done executing the code. I just sit there
You wait.
and I wait
Or-
for an event to happen.
Hmm.
So the user comes along, this annoying user keeps clicking on it, clicks the image again. So when the user clicks the image, what happens?
Calls the image function.
No. When I click the
Oh, the
image,
on-click.
the on-click
triggers.
event fires. So the on-click handler gets executed. And we end up calling this arrow function, which calls set index with value
Of 2.
plus 1, which is a 2.
So you mean on line 12,
This is
when we do
interesting.
on click, is it we are pretty much triggering the event queue, right?
No, this has nothing to do with the event queue yet. We're just executing this code. This is the event handler. Okay, this is the event handler. The event handler is called, we call set index and pass it the value 2. Now we've got the value 2 and we call the state setter. What are the 2 things that happen since I called the state setter?
It updates the cache. and it
Updates the
triggers
cache, gives it a 2, and now we put a render in the queue. Okay,
I have a question.
yes.
It's interesting how after it's waiting for an event to happen, that we can just execute the code on line 12
Yeah, it's a function.
without
You
calling,
can always call functions.
even if it's in the return statement,
Yeah,
it
you
doesn't
can call
matter.
functions. Yep, doesn't matter.
Oh.
Yeah, it's actually kind of magic.
Yeah, it seems like.
So there's a lot of stuff that happens in JavaScript that's kind of magic. And but basically that function gets remembered in the event handler. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's hung on to. And we'll actually, in one of the later exercises towards the end of class, we'll talk about how that magic happens. Okay, but right now it's just magic. Remember the spherical cow. It's our spherical cow view of what's going on. There's a whole bunch more going on under the covers, but I'm just giving you the basics, the basic outline of what it is, how it works. Okay. All right. So now we've
Set it.
we called this function, called the state setter, updated the cache, updated the event queue, added a render to the event queue. Then we're done executing this function. What happens when we're done executing the function? We check the event queue. What do we find? A render. Okay, how do we render?
We call the function.
Call the function. So we call the function. What's the first line of code that executes?
The use state is called
Line 8. So it calls use state, passes it.
0.
No, it passes it
A 0.
a 0. See, it's passing at 0. Remember, when you call a function, it just resets to whatever the code says. It resets to whatever the code says. There's no memory. When a function is called again, there's no memory.
But the memory is in the index.
The memory is in the cache.
Oh, it's not even in the index?
Not in
It's
there. It's in the cache. React is holding on to it for us.
Okay.
It's in React's cache. React owns this. This is React's cache.
Okay.
So the memory is in the cache.
Okay.
It's not in the function. There is no memory in the functions.
Mhm.
Functions do not have memory. Okay.
But why?
They're like teenagers. They always forget everything,
But why?
especially if you tell them to do something. Yes.
But why the thing is, I thought when I hear it cache, I think when we refresh the page, it has to stay the same,
No,
not reset.
this is a cache that only stays alive as long as the page is loaded, the page is up.
Oh.
If you refresh the page, the cache disappears. So JavaScript or the browser wipes out all of the cache and stuff when you refresh the page.
Oh, that's why sometimes when you enter information and then you refresh, it
It's gone.
disappears. It's
Yep,
gone.
it's
Okay.
gone. Yep. Whenever you refresh a page, it's like closing the app. All of the memory for it disappears and we start fresh.
Oh, so we're gonna have more state in the future. We're gonna have a state.
Yeah, state all over the place.
No,
Okay.
I mean, the use state, we're gonna have another.
Yeah, you'll write components that have 6 use state calls in them.
Save the state.
Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. So there we go. We are doing our render again. We're calling use state, passing it a 0. React says, is this the first time the component has rendered? No.
No.
So I return the value from cache. I ignore the 0 and I return the value from cache.
So use state is doing all that.
Use state is ignoring
Is ignoring
the value that you
reading the
pass.
cache.
The only time the use state function pays attention to this value is if it's the first render. Okay. After that, it just ignores it and instead returns the value from cache.
Mhm.
So now it's returning the value from cache. So instead of an array with 1 and setter, it's returning an array with
2.
2
2.
setter. Okay. All right. So now we destructure. Index gets the value
Of 2,
2. Set index gets the value.
2.
State set function.
The state setter function. Okay, good. Now we're gonna render our JSX. We find all the curly braces. We create a new arrow function here. And we look up sources at
2.
2, and we put that in here for the source value, which will be the kitty picture. Okay.
Just a question. So on line 8, when you mentioned index is 2, does
Uh-huh.
that index get called and return number 2, right?
No, set index does not return anything. It got set 2 because use state returned this array. I destructured this array and the first value is a 2. So index got set to this, to 2, and set index got set to that, to the setter. Okay, this is array destructuring. Has nothing to do with this calling the state setter function. The state setter function gets called here, only when you click.
Uh-huh.
The only time the state setter function gets called is when you click. Okay, so we've got indexes 2 and a set index. Now we evaluate our JSX. Oh, I already did that. I already walked through that. So here we got the kitty picture, put that value in there. We're done. We're done executing the function. So good, we finished executing the function. JavaScript says, okay, I've done executing the function. What do I do next?
Wait.
Oh, wait, sorry, this is the re-render, correct? So I finished executing the function. Then because I finished the executing the function, I finished executing it so I can take it out of the event queue. All right, so now I'm done executing the function. I look in the event queue. What do I find?
Nothing.
So what do I do?
Wait.
Sit there and wait. Wait for something to happen. Do we want the user to click again?
Yeah.
No.
We're gonna click again, okay? Gotta make sure we got it down. So that annoying user comes and clicks on the image again. So when the user clicks on the image, what happens?
It calls the onClick event handler.
Excellent. The event handler gets called by the DOM. It's not React doing this. It's the DOM is calling the event handler. The DOM calls the event handler, which is this arrow function. This arrow function calls set index and passes it
2.
2 plus 1.
already 2. The index is 2 already, so it passes it.
3.
2 plus 1 is 3, so it passes it 3. What are the two things that happen when I call the state setter?
The cache is updated and
3
triggers a re-render.
and C, yeah.
What did you say?
She whispered as she walked past one of my prior students. She said, it triggers a re-render. See, my students get this memorized. They know what happens when you call a state setter. There's the re-render got triggered by putting it into the event queue. Okay. Then we're done executing this event handler. So when we're done executing functions, what do?
we check the event queue.
Check the event queue. And what do we find?
A render.
A render. Let's go render again. Okay.
But
You guys are doing pretty well. This might be the last time we get clicked on. Okay. So the first line of code that executes is
use state
Use state is called
use state, pass it
0.
0. Use state says, is this the first time it's been rendered?
No.
No. So I return
3.
the value from cache. I ignore the input, the parameter, and I pass and I return 3. So now instead of a 2, I'll do a 3 here in my array. And then I destructure the return array. Index, the variable index gets set to
3.
and set index gets set to
State setter
state setter function. Now I'm going to evaluate my return, my JSX. So I create this arrow function. And I look up this sources at
3.
3, and I get
Unknown.
undefined. So I say source is equal to undefined. So that's why I'm going to get a broken image. Okay, so I now return all of this JSX. It gets pushed into the DOM. And then I say, okay, I'm done with this. Take it out of the event queue. And now I'm done executing. And so what do I do when I'm done executing my functions?
Wait.
I look at the
Event queue.
event queue. Is there anything in it?
No.
No. So the event queue is empty. And therefore I sit there and I wait. Okay. Do we want to click the button again?
I'm not gonna get an image.
You want to click it? All right. It got clicked. Okay, it got clicked. What's the first thing that happened? What happens when you click it? You get a click event, and it's handled by the click event handler. So this function gets called, this arrow function, and we're calling
set index.
And we're passing it
Index plus 1.
index plus 1, which is going to be
4.
Okay, good. Let's have Noah answer all of these questions since he's the one that forced us to click. Okay, all right. So now, what's the second thing that happens when you call the state setter? We updated the cache.
So the call the state setter, we update the cache and we put the re-render.
Yep, we trigger a re-render, which means we put a render event in the queue. Okay, all right, good. So now we finished executing this event handler. So what do we do when we're done executing?
We check
the event queue. What do we find?
We find a render.
A render, which means we
we
call the component again. Okay, and line
And line
8 executes.
We execute the line we call use state with the initial value again with 0.
Uh-huh.
And then we the index hold the first hold.
Okay, but the use state says, is this the first render?
No.
No. So it returns the value from cache,
which is
4 in the setter. So we do a 4 here.
And assigns it to index.
Yep, so index gets the value 4
And
and set index gets the state setter
get
function.
the state setter function.
Okay, then we evaluate our JSX. We create an arrow function here. And we look up sources at
It's
4,
out of range.
which is again undefined. And then we push all this JSX into the DOM.
Keep getting undefined.
Yep, we push this JSX into the DOM. We're done executing, we're done with our re-render. Now we're done executing our function. So what do?
We check the event queue.
We check the event queue. Okay, set. Even if you want me to, I'm not clicking that button again. Okay, we'll do this again, I think, when we do events after the next exercise, when we go over that. Okay, this is state. This is how state works. If you can get this, if you can walk through this yourself and figure out what's happening, figure out how to update cache and manage the event queue in your mind, then you're going to understand React. Okay, so tonight when you review, look at the code, go through the code again, manage the cache, do it by hand on a piece of paper, and take care of it. And this is being recorded, so you can look at the video and refresh your memory if you need to. You need to have this whole mechanism deeply ingrained in yourself. So when you walk by and I say, what does the state setter do? Updates the cache, triggers a re-render, okay? Memorized, deeply ingrained in your bones. All right, that's it for state. Any questions on state?
No, that's really good explanation.
Can we manipulate the memory of state?
The
or-
cache? No, only React.
Only
Only
React.
React can do that. You have no idea where it is. You don't know nothing.
Okay.
The only thing you can do is call the state setter,
Oh,
and that will update it. Yes.
Yeah, the question is now related to state. So on 12, when we call on click, so inside the parentheses, we can put event. We can put event, right?
Here, yes, it's actually passed an event.
It's an event and we can actually.
Yes, you can
use
do
an
something with
actual-
that event if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a click event. Yep, that's right. And you'll do that occasionally.
Yeah.
We do it.
But why in old, when we used to work with Sean, we used event and then we can use on the click.
So on-click is managed by React. React puts it in there. So that in the DOM, you register an event handler. So what React does is it says, oh, I set the on-click value to something. That means I have to register an event handler for this component. And then also React takes care of when the component unmounts that it removes the event handler. So it takes care of that for you. You don't have to worry about any of that nonsense that you had to do in junior side. Okay. Yeah, so we taught you all that stuff in the junior side, you know, create element, add children, set attributes and so on, register events. So you'd understand how the DOM works. You'll never have to do that again. With React, you don't do that stuff again. You just let React take care of it for you. Okay. But yes, okay. So the next exercise is React is a game of props, state, and events. That's React. Prop, state, and event. You got those three things down, you're set. So props and state we've done. Events, we're going to do next. The thing about events is you can declare your own events. So I can declare an event for image. I could call it on type, on image change, on whatever. Whatever it is I want, I declare my own event and I can give it, and I can determine what that behavior is. For example, I can say, maybe I'll say it's on rotate. And when the image gets clicked, I call on rotate with current index. Okay, something like that. So there's just all kinds of things you can do with events. You declare your own events. And so the next exercise is learning how to declare events and how to manage them. Okay, and then we'll take this. So right now, the thing we've got up there, they all rotate independently. Okay, that's kind of annoying. You really want them to go all together at the same time. When I click this next image button down here, I want them to rotate. So that's what we'll do. We'll figure out how we manage that with events. So there you go. Props, state, events. That's React. Okay. Most of React. The most fundamental part of React.
Props are actually also that we are declaring them, like we are declaring the props as attributes would be declared, but in our own
yes,
terms.
Yeah, we declare our own. So it's cool. We declare our own props, we declare our own state, and we declare our own events. So we can basically control anything that's going on in the DOM.
That's
okay.
Wild.
All right.
Now I see why we need so much planning before coding, because you really have to plan
Yeah.
everything you want to do.
Yep, you have to figure out what all those things are going to happen. What are my props going to be? What are my state going to be? What are my events going to be? Okay. All right, good. Let's do that. I've already assigned the exercise, so go ahead and work on the exercise. And when I get I'll just warn you that Rakaya already submitted her solution to events. So you're on the hook now. You got to get going. And we do need to catch up a little bit, so please don't take too long on this one. I'll give you about an hour, and then if you're not done in an hour, I'll come and beat you up and get us going. Okay? All right. I am going to leave the Zoom going, but I'm going to stop recording.